Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings. So, I've said it before, I'll say it again. Mercedes Lackey has traditionally written her Valdemar series in trilogies. She has one or two single book outliers. The story of Levin Firestorm being one of them. But the big thing that I've read nearly all of the series. There are a few books in it that I haven't read for various reasons, but I'm going to be reading basically all of the main series. I'm not going to be doing the collections of short stories. I'm not going to be doing that book that she put out that was sort of the reference on Valdemar. It's good if you're the kind of rabid fan who likes that sort of thing, but I was never that sort of fan with Valdemar, so it's not something that's really going to particularly speak to me. So, Last Herald Mage Trilogy, because, as I mentioned before, I'm reading these not in the order that they were written, as really one ought, because the order that they were written gives you a better bead on the proper development of the universe, and how Mercedes Lackey developed it along the way. Reading it, I'm reading this in chronological order of events. But what makes this intriguing in some ways is that The Last Herald Mage is the next book in chronological order following the Griffin trilogy. But this book is taking place something like 3,000 years later. The Mage Wars, the Mage Wars that were the centerpiece of the first book of the Griffin trilogy, the, in some ways, fundamental cause of what happened in the second, and the third book was almost like the aftermath. The thing about that is that the Mage Wars shaped the world in which Valdemar exists, which, if I recall correctly, is called Velgarth, but that's not something that comes up in the books in any particularly significant way, so if it is not in fact planet Velgarth, I expect a fan to show up and complain at me. But here's the thing. And this is explained way down the road, because when it isn't until you get to the Mage Storms trilogy, which is another 1,000 years after this book, it isn't until that point that we as readers, and that was something like 12, 13 books into the series, it isn't until that point that we as readers hear about how the Mage Wars created the world that came after. The thing is, however, that what we've got in this book is people that are so far distant from the Mage Wars that the Mage Wars have been lost to the mists of history. They don't know what happened. What they know about the Mage Wars is less than what we know about the societies that were precursors to the ancient Egyptians. We know they were there, we know they did stuff, but we don't actually know what went on. So, Last Herald Mage Trilogy is all about Vanyel Ashkevron, and The Last Herald Mage, it's actually a very keynote moment in the history of Valdemar, because this is the story of why Valdemar doesn't have any real mages, any real magic by the time we get to Arrows of the Queen, which the Arrows trilogy is the first trilogy that Mercedes Lackey wrote in this series. Now, they have so-called mind magic, but that's basically psychic powers. It's telekinesis, it's telepathy, it's empathy, pyromancy. or rather pyrokinesis, pardon me. It's psychic powers rather than so-called true magic. So this is a trilogy. Now this cover that you're seeing here is the cover of what I have, which is the trilogy all in one book. But this is the cover of the first book of the trilogy, Magic's Pawn. Now, Vanyal Ashkevron is significant, not least because he is a leading gay character. That this whole series, this whole trilogy is about a gay man. So, if this is something that's important to you in books, that, you want to read a story in which a character is actually openly, clearly, and defiantly gay, this is a book for that. This isn't like what you got with Anne McCaffrey, where gay people were absolutely established in the Pern reality on Pern, but she didn't write gay couples, mainly because, as she said in her short story collection that I reviewed back a while ago, she's terrible at writing them. It's a very good thing she didn't. But Vanyel it's a very interesting story, in part because Vanyel doesn't have any inner conflict about being gay, or rather, as they call it, Sheich, which is a shortened loan word from the language of the Teledras, and the word in Teledras is Sheachern, which means roughly one who is like self. That is, the idea is a person who can only be romantically attracted and sexually attracted to people who are the same sex as they are. Anyways, but what's interesting is that he is raised by a father who goes to tremendous efforts to hide from him even the notion that being gay exists. And so what's really, really interesting is that he doesn't have an agonizing, oh my God, I wish I weren't gay, life sucks being gay, or, am I really gay or not? What he has is the revelation of, this is a thing? Oh my God, this is a thing. I have a thing. I have a definition for something I have had no words for. And so his discovery that he's gay is actually a delightful, positive revelation on his part, because his father was really, really concerned that his son was gay and wanted to keep him from being gay by hiding the existence of the concept from him. And so it's a very oddly positive discovery, because it's somebody who discovers this about himself and actually is relieved and joyful because he finally has a word for it and an explanation, and he thinks it's awesome. And that's one of the really, really enjoyable things about this trilogy, in between the angst because Vanyel had an abused childhood because his father, I get the feeling that his father decided that his son was gay because his son was A, interested in music, and B, didn't like people hitting him. I sometimes get the feeling that that his response was, you don't like people hitting you? You must be gay. We have to do something about this. It's very odd. But that one of the really nice things about this series is that if you are somebody who isn't interested in a gay lead per se, he's not defined by the fact that he's gay. There are a couple of points in this series and in this book where it comes up. In this very book, they say, people are prejudiced against it. We have to keep this from your father because he'll pack you off to some religious sect that will try to beat it out of you, and so on and so forth. It's not that it isn't a factor. It's clearly a factor, and it's clearly, a thing that needs to be paid attention to. But at the same time, his being gay doesn't define him, because he's defined as a musician. He is defined as you know, as by his abused childhood. He's defined by his cleverness. He's defined by, you know, the fact that he's a good person. And by the end of this, he is also defined by his need to help other people. It's one of the key things in this book is that he asks his life bond soulmate, Tillendel, you know, I don't get why you want to help these, you know, faceless strangers. I don't understand it. And Tillendel basically says, I can't not. I have all of this power, and I am compelled to help other people and make their lives better. And Vaniel just doesn't get it until the end of the book. The key thing, of course, is that Vaniel has never had any reason to look beyond himself, because it's one of those things that, you know, an abused kid is very likely to wind up not looking beyond him or herself, because they've never had any reason to see that anyone else is worth the effort. And so it takes the bulk of this book for Vaniel to see that other people are worth the effort, because it takes the bulk of this book for him to crawl out of the hole that he was basically tossed into by being abused by his family for the bulk of his youth and childhood. And it isn't until the end of the book that he sort of has this realization of why helping other people is good, and that compulsion that most people will feel at some point to help a person, not because it will be advantageous to you in some way, or because this is your personal friend and because helping your personal friend makes you happy because your personal friend being happy makes you happy, but that seeing somebody who you don't know getting assistance in some way can make you feel good. It isn't until he's basically been able to get to the point of, you know, seeing other people as being worth it, seeing that other people have troubles too, of not feeling like he's the only person in the world who's constantly having everything fall on top of him, which is, after all, it's a big problem when you live in misery and no one else looks miserable. It's very, very easy to fall into the trap of, why should I help anybody? Everything sucks worse for me than for them. And so a lot of this book is just about him coming to this realization. But also, of course, there is the horrific foreshadowing of the tragic end of this trilogy, which, to an extent, I'm not giving anything away, because here's the thing. In Arrows of the Queen, in the Arrows trilogy, in the very first book of that trilogy, Talia is talking about, here's my favorite book, and this is a book of history, and Harold Vaniel died horribly at this pass. And so you read this, and it's like, this is the story of Harold Vaniel. Well, we knew he died horribly at the pass, because we already read the Arrows trilogy. So I refuse to believe that I'm giving anything away, because you should be reading these in order of publication, not in chronological order. But yeah, there's a reason why the third book in this series is called Magic's Price, and that's because it's very sad. Anyway, so this is, now, the thing about heralds is that heralds are kind of chosen by the gods, that they have these magic horses that have a built-in good and evil radar, and the horses will only pick good people to be heralds. So that's sort of how the country keeps itself on an even keel, also by insisting that whoever the king is has to be a herald. So, you know, this is a country that will never stop being a monarchy, because their monarchy will always be good. Anyway, so having not really said all that much about this book, because mostly it's just, you know, abused kid recovering from abuse and then recovering from losing his soulmate horrifyingly, I think that's everything, so I will see you all with the next book next week.